Welcome back, folks, to the WP-Tonic interview show. This is episode 613. We've got a really great guest. We've got Christine Chirinos. I've just butchered the surname, but I
would you like for me to say it? It's okay.
Yes, if you don't mind,
yeah.
Christine, have mercy on my soul, will you?
It's okay. It's Christie Chirinos.
Chirinos. The listeners and viewers have got used to my butchering of guest surnames. You take it in good heart, though. I appreciate you doing that. We got an interesting show. We're gonna be covering some serious stuff, but hopefully in not a depressive and honest way. We're gonna be discussing what's it like to be a really bright and young and very open and pleasant woman in the WordPress tech scene. We're also going to be talking about race and its part in tech. Tech can't separate itself from normal society. Society's woes affect tech, but because tech is an amplifier, it can make things better or worse. So we're going to be discussing that. So we're going to be discussing some serious subjects. Before I let Christine introduce herself, I just want to tell you about one of our major sponsors, and that's Castos. I moved to Castos about 3 months ago. I was with another previous podcast hosting provider for about 4 or 5 years. Castos came on, the prices were really attractive, but also Matt Medeiros had joined them as their manager or director of sales and customer experience. I thought if Matt had moved there, I should have a look at it. They moved over 700 episodes flawlessly. The actual interface is a joy to use. It really is powerful but simple to use. The support is amazing. And it's like I say, it's built on WordPress. They're deeply involved in the WordPress community. And it's just been a joy to use. So if you're looking to do podcasting for yourself or helping clients do that, have a look at what Castos has to offer. You won't be disappointed. I highly recommend them. So, Christine, do you want to quickly introduce yourself? Because you've got a lot of irons in the fire, haven't you? You do your podcast and you got your day job, and so would you like to quickly introduce yourself?
Sure, we'll do a broad overview of all the irons in the fire. My name is Christie Chirinos. I work right now leading the partnerships program at Codable.io, which is the largest marketplace of vetted WordPress freelance developers. And I did launch a podcast a few months ago called the Open Source Economist, which is a seasonal show that is about 9 episodes a season, which just covers topics on what is going on in the open source world as a whole and how it ties into existing research and academic subjects that are or often aren't related to the open source ecosystems. And so the goal is to bridge together these two worlds, to connect dots and solve problems. It's a explanation-based show, right? So a lot of it is me talking about what is and bringing in experts and guests that know more than I do to help me understand other concepts. And it's been a joy to do, and there is season 1 is rolling out right now as we record this. So it's been a blast. A bit of my past work involved with WordPress. Before this, I worked as the product manager for managed commerce at Liquid Web. And before that, I worked as one of the co-owners of Caldera Labs, which made Caldera Forms. And I've had all sorts of other WordPress experience with that. Before that, I worked in the nonprofit sector, doing nonprofit technology things management, and worked, building sites for people and just overall existing on the internet. It's been fun. Some non-WordPress stuff. I live in Austin, Texas. I love music and make music and have a cat.
Oh, well, you're perfect then, especially if you can get
That just came out.
cat
Yeah, right.
on the
Let's
show.
bring up the cat. Yeah.
Yeah, because I don't know if you watched any of our round tables, but Sally, one of our regular lady panelists, her cats often introduce themselves, and my actual numbers of people watching and listening increase enormously if there's cats in the show. It's quite damaging to one's ego when one knows that you could triple the numbers of your podcast if it was just about cats. So there we go. Puts you in your place, doesn't it? Now, I just want to put this to you. It's kind of an observation rather than a question. Well, it has a question as well, hopefully, but I'm notorious for these. But the cult of WordPress, I call it. What I mean by that is that before the pandemic, and I think I've been extremely supportive of the WordPress community. Now, I don't publish podcasts. I make my living from WordPress, but through my podcast and through presentations at WordCamps, I've tried to be a member of the community, and a positive one. I've done my best, I feel. And I've given a lot of opportunities to developers, designers, and all sorts of people to publicize their plugin, their service through my podcasts. But I noticed, especially there's what I call the cult of WordPress, where I've observed only a small, and I'm not even sure this is bad or good, and this is why I'll be interested in your perspective on it. I've noticed that there's a small clique of people that seem to overemphasize themselves with WordPress, like their whole life was dominated by WordPress. They had no outside life apart from going to WordCamps, talking about WordPress, or everything seemed to be about WordPress. Do you think there's some truth to my observation? And I found it a bit crazy, a bit slightly stomach turning. There's something in my psyche told me that they're just taking it too far. What's your own observation and view on that?
I think that it's a natural human instinct to do that. And I don't think that it's exclusive to WordPress. You see it all over the place, right? There's this really strong need in people to belong to something, to work towards something that matters, or to feel like they're working towards something that matters, to be leaders or be experts, and have the esteem and have the satisfaction of expertise and recognition, right? We want recognition from our families, from our friends. And so to me, that has always seemed like a natural thing to develop in communities. I think that what you haven't said is whether it's good or bad.
Yeah, I'm in two minds.
Right?
I'm in two minds. Instinctively, something saying to me, and when I've always when I've ever had business personal relationships that have gone wrong, my instincts were there from day one. I just repressed them because for greed, or because it suited me, or it was convenient, or I was weak at the time. But it was all there from the beginning. It's just that I didn't want to see it.
Yeah. That's something that I've also learned to find, right? And I think that all of us eventually learn to listen to our intuition. and to realize that if you have a bad feeling about something from the beginning, it's probably for a reason. There's so much information that we don't process consciously, and that eventually we have to realize is coming from a place, coming from an experience that maybe we've had in the past, and it's worth listening to, right?
Well, they
and
do say that 2/3 of communication is non-verbal, don't
right. Right. Yeah. So that makes sense to me. And with the question of, that's a funny term, the cult of WordPress, I don't have an opinion other than it looks to me like a natural instinct. And whether it's good or bad, or somewhere along the spectrum of good and bad, I think the better question to ask is it harmful? And on how many layers, right? For example, you mentioned something about it's everything's WordPress or not doing other things, right?
Well,
Maybe
look at the kettle. What's the term? The kettle.
the kettle calling the pot black.
Yeah, I do 2 podcasts about WordPress. I do videos about WordPress, and I also make my living. I run a platform that hosts WordPress websites, plus an agency that does development work. Literally 14 hours of my day is around WordPress. But so you could say that I'm embedded in the cult of WordPress, but there was something about the people I'm remarking about, where they seem to, I'm struggling for the right words. I just wanted to see if you think I'm on the right track. There's something about them that they've pushed it even a bit further than what I'm doing.
And again, to me, that looks like a natural instinct, right? There's this sense of wanting to belong. And that's not...
I'll give you an example. If you want to get, I've got a great co-host, a great panelist on my roundtable show, Spencer Forum. And he doesn't mind, he trained as a lawyer, and he doesn't mind getting into arguments, he quite likes it, really. And he, through his blog and through his social media, he got into this insane back and forth with the Oxygen page building community. And you think he had insulted a religious cult by the amount of flack he got from this Oxygen crowd. Literally they are, and you find a lot of page, like, not only Oxygen, I'm not just picking on Oxygen, the Divi crowd, or also I have found them rabid in their enthusiasm and support of Divi, and this Oxygen crowd, they are really rabid about protecting their blessed Oxygen. It's a freaking page builder, folks. What do you think of my comment there?
You see it in non-WordPress. I think fandom culture is a really interesting parallel, right? People get really into certain musicians or whatever, right? Certain pieces of media, book series, and they learn everything about it, and it's all they want to talk about, and they have it decorated all over their house. And I've never had that instinct, and I wonder what it's like. And I can't tell you where it comes from other than I see it and I have no opinion about it. I think the only thing that I start to think about is, when does it become harmful, right? Something that I noticed at the beginning of the pandemic was the effect on the mental health and the social media posts and the blog posts of people who really very much had one interest, whether it was in WordPress or outside, that the pandemic sort of flat out shut down. And that it's such an incredible challenge, because on one hand you love it, but on the other hand, if it is taken away by an external force, what do? How do you help yourself? How do we help you? And that's not really something I ever figured out, because when the pandemic set in, of course, all of us were stressed out in our own ways. For me, I love to travel. I love to be out and about. My job has been remote from way before the pandemic, and my daily routine was wake up and get to work first thing in the morning, work until work is over, and then be out of the house, be
Yeah,
out
that's
of
what
the
I do.
gym, be at a
I've got to,
friend's house.
I've got to get out. I'm on a fit.
Yeah.
I put on a ton of weight. No, it's not funny. I was clinically a beast.
Oh, I'm sorry to
Uh,
hear that.
oh, it was just, it's quite strange. I didn't see it. I, looked in the mirror and I couldn't see that I just got into a mess. And I've been on a fitness strict diet, and I've lost about 30 pounds in
Wow,
about 4 months.
congratulations. Yeah.
But I've got another 30 pounds to go. But it's really quite amazing how one can delude oneself. Just to, yeah, it's really hard. I think just to finish off before we go for our break, Christine, I think there's nothing wrong with being really enthusiastic, supportive, open. But then there's a line where you become a zealot, where you become opinionated and judgmental, and become attack other people with different views, and you're not interested in their views. There's only one path, one plugin, one ring, and everybody else must be damned and they're going to hell. Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah, and that's a line into harmful, right? That's exactly what I'm talking about. The way that communities that exist that way form and exist. I don't know what to tell you about that other than we see it over and over, right? But when we talk about, is that good? Is that bad? To me, I ask the question, when does it become harmful? When do we start hurting ourselves and other people, right? When are you just really excited about a favorite singer? And when are you so excited about this favorite singer or this favorite plugin or whatever that you're in this stress, like actual physical stress that hurts you and hurts the people around you because of this thing? That's when it becomes harmful, right? Going back to the pandemic, for me, these things shut down, the outside world shut down, but I had, for a lack of a better word, diversified my risk. And so there were things that I couldn't do, but there were things that I could do when I was alone at home, right? Or just communicating with the people I love via Zoom. And so it wasn't as completely devastating as it might be if one's energy is focused on one single place and one single place alone. And that's the question we should be asking. When does it become harmful, right? Because you use the word cult. We have that word for a reason, because we have identified that at that point it becomes harmful. Right. What are the dynamics of that, right? Like you get removed from your family. You get removed from the independence of your finances. And so there's little factors in there in which we start seeing when people are getting hurt.
Yeah. We're going to go for our break. I want to talk, I'm going to ask Christine about a question about gaslighting. We'll be back in a few moments, folks. We're coming back. We discussed the cult of WordPress. We're on to gaslighting. Now, tomorrow I'm going to be doing my roundtable show, Christine, and I'm going to, because it's the summer, interesting stories are hard to find. So I'm going to start. I found some reasonably interesting. By the way, next week your ex-boss Chris Lemmer is going to be coming on the roundtable show.
Oh, fun!
That should be a blast. A big beast of the WordPress community, the cult of WordPress. He doesn't mince his words, does he? But I'm going to start off with an editorial piece. And basically, it's about the great leader, Matt Mullenweg. I watched his last interview last night, and I think he's gaslighter supremo of the WordPress community. his this interview that I watched, it was so illogical, so all over the place. His arguments, when you really analyze them, are awful, in my opinion. And he's, over the past few years, I see him as an anti-democratic force in the WordPress community. I know when Gutenberg was first promoted by himself, a group of very powerful and respected people went to him and asked that WordPress should be reorganized and be more democratic, and they were just dismissed and pushed away. And I truly see him as an anti-democratic force in the WordPress community. And I see him as a gaslighter supremo. What's your comments about what I've just said?
Whoa. I don't know that I have a comment. I feel like a politician, right? I'm like, no comment. You know, but
You're very wise. I've just committed suicide in the cult of WordPress. You know, I'm a marked man now. You know, there's no hope for me. There's no hope for me.
My impression
it's
is
nothing personal, Matt. You know, honestly, I'm sure
it's not nothing personal to me.
No, I'm sure he's a very sweet, nice person, but I think we have seen this in, you know, in the billionaire class, haven't we? With Bezos and Branson, they want to fly off in their rockets and live in outer space, don't they? You know, and our great leader almost has the similar amount of money. And I just wonder, in the end, do they live in a bubble of their own creation, basically?
Of course. And that's something that all of us can observe, because all of us live in some sort of bubble of our own creation. And something that I've seen in my life has been the way that those bubbles appear and disappear. You know, something that is in my background is that I'm an American immigrant. My family moved to South Florida when I was 9 years old, and I grew up in and around the community of Latin American immigrants that live in that area, people who don't speak English and, you know, work these different service jobs, sometimes work under the table, sometimes work without documentation or undocumented. And one of the things that astounded me was that when I went to college, that entire world that I know exists was completely out of sight. I know that it's there because I was in it. But the moment you enter another bubble, the other bubble just...
Well, just you know, it's bad enough in, you know, I'm a joint citizen. I lived up in England, Britain for 40 years of my life. I'm now 58 years of age. You know, I'm old. There's no hope for me, Christine. But I've lived here for 14 years, and the one thing, I thought it was bad in the UK, but the one thing that the established media in America really, really does not want to talk about or show is poverty, and how a very large percentage of the population in this country live in grinding poverty, and the consequences for children, women, old people of that. They do not want to talk about it, show it, or anything, do they?
No. And that's a problem, because you can't solve...
And I think technology,
you have to look at them.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I also think the big technology players like Google or Facebook, they really don't want to show that either, do they?
There's a saying that I've heard that I really like, which is, anyone who thinks that there is any kind of grand conspiracy has never tried to organize a group dinner. and
If you ever try to get a panel WordPress experts to come, it's like herding cats, Christine.
Right.
Literally,
Right.
I've just accepted it's only so much control I've got over these people. They basically do whatever they want to do.
And that's something that I love, because I think it points to the idea that everybody wants to do good. And I do believe that.
I think so. I'm not too sure about that.
But there's like different layers of incompetence that get in the way of that, right? And
I'm not sure it's incompetence or indifference. So maybe a bit of both, actually.
Yeah. And when we talk about the issue of looking at poverty in the face, some of that is discomfort, especially in the United States. I think that a lot of Americans tend to see poverty not as a state, but as a moral failing. And
well, it's not totally incorrect, is it? But it's just totally overemphasized. When you have a society that offers no ability, no helping hand to change your life, that in every aspect, even through education, burdens you with enormous debt, which you cannot ever escape until you're actually dead, and thinks that is somehow that you get all the major universities, yes, they offer scholarships, but when you actually look at their endowments and how much money some of these, especially the Ivy League schools in this country, their scholarships are pathetic. It goes from the top to bottom, this nauseating indifference to human suffering. And America's got great strengths compared to England, and England's got great strengths compared to America, but the inability to offer any opportunities for people to really change their lives and to progress and grow is rather depressing, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it comes from a cultural attitude that all of us can work to challenge. That's something that's really difficult, is saying, well, why have things been that way? And sometimes that comes from a belief, and it's not a misguided one, because it's what our society has taught us, and we've seen plenty of examples of it, that poverty is a problem that can be solved with enough hard work. That's not 100% false.
No.
But it's also not 100% true. And the truth exists in the middle of providing the right support and honoring the right mentors.
I think Malcolm X, if you really study the life of Malcolm X, which is inspiring to say the least, and really read his writings and his real message, he never underemphasized the psychic damage that poverty does to a lot of the people. They basically give up and they turn to drugs, other things, and the grinding, not only the physical consequences of being born into grinding poverty, but the spiritual and psychic damage that it does. Malcolm X's observations of this and how you must resist it and build yourself up as a human being is very insightful. Just to finish off, would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And specifically, the community that you're talking about is the Black American community. And this is a community that has been ravaged by a several 100-year history of slavery and theft. Just now, we are starting to talk about creating a system of financial reparations for Black Americans who had land and wealth stolen from them through riots, burning, and violence. Assets that today, if quantified in today's dollars, would equal billions of dollars with a B, if not more, because we don't have a complete and total perfect structure to figure out how much value that is. And not only does that cause day-to-day stress, but it also causes generational stress. And it goes back into thinking, to look at solutions, you have to look at the problem in the eyes. And that is really uncomfortable for a lot of people. It's feels it gets a lot of people feeling powerless. And feeling powerless means that you rather look away and say it's not happening than look at it in the face and say, I'm going to take you on. You're a monster that's going down. And it starts with getting together with the people you know and saying, what are we going to do about this? So
we're going to wrap up the podcast. Are you okay in continuing this as what I call bonus content for another
sure.
15 minutes, which you'll be able to see the whole show, the podcast and the bonus content. I'm going to be continuing our discussion about race and technology with Christine. But before we wrap it up, I wanted to talk about one of our other sponsors, PeachPay. PeachPay, if you're looking to get really easy to use shopping cart functionality for your own website or for clients' websites, that's really mobile friendly and flexible, and you can set up really, really quickly. And it's also free, the plugin. Go to PeachPay. It's peachpay.app. It will be in the show notes of this great interview. It's a great product, it's free, and have a try of it for your own website or for clients' websites. You're going to be impressed. So, Christine, what's the best way for people to find out more about you, your thoughts, your views, and what you're up to?
Sure. You can go to my website. I'm at christiechirinos.com and see some of my projects, the podcast, and I'm on Twitter. It's at XTIE Chirinos, and you can follow me. I can tell you that most of what I post is goofiness. It is.
Well, I like this interview. We've covered some. Thank you for being up for it. But to say we've covered some serious topics so far would be a slight. But I think we've done it in a reasonably light-hearted way, haven't we?
I think so. And I think that comes from, I do approach life in that way. And, we've talked about serious topics and communities that are experiencing a lot of pain. And I think that the first thing is to not make anyone else's pain but your pain about yourself. And so, a lot of my stuff that you'll see out there is just goofy, right? It's just things that I like, things that I see, things that I don't like, talked about in goofy ways.
I just want to say, I think people like you are one of the reasons why I keep in the WordPress community. It's just not only because of my living, because you're a very impressive young woman. And thank you for everything you've done in the WordPress community, Christine.
Thanks.
You'll always be welcome on the podcast, by the way. If you want to come back, you might not want to, but you're always welcome. Now, we're going to wrap up the podcast. If you really want to support the show, there's two things you can do. You can go over and give us a review on Apple Podcast Player. That really does help the show. And join us on the WP-Tonic Facebook group. It's the WP Mastermind WordPress Mastermind group. If you're using WordPress almost every day or you're making your living from WordPress in any way, this is the group to join. The link will be in the show notes. Do a search in Facebook for the WP-Tonic WordPress Mastermind group and join us. It's a great community. We'll be back next week with another great guest, another great interview. Join us on the bonus content, which you'll be able to watch on the WP-Tonic YouTube channel. We'll see you next week, folks. Bye. So back into bonus content. That was a mouthful, wasn't it? But I thought I did it pretty slick. How's my podcasting abilities, Christie?
I think you're doing great. I hope I'm doing okay.
Yeah, you're doing great. Well, it's the Beauty and the Beast, isn't it?
I'm out here with my virtual background, like half my body is disappearing. You can't even see my microphone.
I didn't know that was a virtual background.
You didn't see it?
No, I thought that was your real background.
So here's a fun story. So this is a picture of my apartment, but I'm moving apartments. So I felt like a genius. I was like, okay, I'm gonna take a picture of my apartment as it currently is so that people can't tell as I start taking down the bookcase and packing and doing things like that. So I don't know how much of a genius idea it was, but it seemed like a really good idea at the time.
Yeah. Well, back to our subject. I've been accused of being a communist by some people, which is one of the most ridiculous statements. I regularly get email from disgruntled listeners and viewers.
Wow, what?
You're promoting communism in America. You're a disgrace. What I'm looking for is maybe Canada or Sweden. And I don't think Canada or Sweden, to my knowledge, are communist states. I'm just looking for capitalism with a human face, basically.
Yeah.
I feel that at the present moment we have a kind of quasi corporate fascist state in America, which is also grown in Britain, that which we saw in Italy pre-war, Second World War, where corporate interest and state interest combined into one. And we've seen that the gasoline on the fire is the tech giants. What's your own views about this?
Whoa, that's a huge question about how the entire world works. Where do we start? Where do we start? Well, here's where I'll start. In the main content, we talked about culty attitudes, right? And when I think about culty attitudes, and I'm fascinated by cults. Like I listen to all these podcasts about cults and how they form. I just think they're so weird and interesting. I'm like, what?
There was this lady, I wanted to discuss it in the Round Table show about a year ago. And it was about this lady, Thai something. And she's got an enormous following through YouTube. And she's moved to Costa Rica. Now she's got this little cult community, and you can go and do courses with her in Costa Rica online. And she's an extremely dynamic, powerful, attractive woman. But there was a podcast done about her background and the allegations that are made against her, which some of them aren't true, in my opinion, and some probably do have some element of truth to them. But it was just how she built up an enormous following on YouTube, which has died down a little bit because YouTube are not showing her videos so much. But at one stage, she built up over 3 million subscribers on YouTube, which is it's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah. And where does it come from? I don't think that we have figured that out. I think that's one of our current information age society's most important problems. And when you tell me that people are calling you communist and you're evil, which is so weird, but okay.
Well, there's one thing. There's two things that I despise the most: is communists and fascists. There's two ideologies that I really despise. It must be those two philosophies that together managed to butcher over 200 million people.
Right.
If you include the enormous amount of Chinese that suffered under Mao and his communist regime, it's just butchery of a scale that humanity has never observed, isn't it?
And our, society is striving towards not having this kind of authoritarianism that is harmful, right? And so you end up getting, again, these for lack of a better word, warring factions. And I don't know where it comes from. I'm not an expert. We haven't figured it out. We know, like you said, that YouTube and but I don't even want to call out YouTube. We know that the information age is speeding up the process of this type of radicalization, right? And then we were talking about how at one point it becomes harmful, and what's the point at which it becomes harmful? Well, I would argue that when you're sitting there at your computer getting so angry that you're sending angry emails to people you've never met in person, that cross the line into harmful.
I think I've actually got an answer for you for your actual question. I might be totally wrong. It doesn't actually come from me. I have very few original ideas actually come from my mind.
Me too.
It comes from Nietzsche, the philosopher, the German philosopher, where he was highly critical of the Christian established church for good reason. But he did point out, and he did predict in his philosophy, that when you dismantle a philosophy so fundamental like the established Christian church through science, you leave a chasm, a void, and that be concerned about what fills that void. And I think he predicted, what was going to come from state fascism and from communism, that were kind of quasi-religious cults that filled that. And I think we're seeing that now, but the belief in the state, the belief in your company that will look after you until retirement has all been dismantled.
Right.
There's a void, and there's a void in people when you ask them, what is your philosophy? What guides you? They say, well, nothing. I don't believe in anything. They're deluding themselves, because if you have no personal philosophies yourself, you actually adopt other people's views. You're just not aware of it. And I think that's what's happening to myself. There's a void that's been filled by social media, YouTube, and this new noise. What do you think about that?
I think that's completely correct. And it ultimately comes from a sense of not feeling safe, right? Cults sound so safe. They take you in, you have all these friends, you have something to do, right? And again, I love podcasts about cults and weird stuff like that. And they outline a lot of the ways in which cult recruitment preys on people who are unsafe, people who are vulnerable, people who don't have a big supportive network and who latch on to these things. So I think that right there is completely on point. And as we study this type of thing, we ought to look at that, right? How much of it comes from financial insecurity? How much of it comes from needing to provide for your family and not knowing how? How much comes from the fact that in America, getting access to mental health care starts at a minimum of $150 an hour? What is that? And what's crazy is we can all agree
it's not much better in the UK, even under the National Health Service, the Socialist Health Service, as some of my conservative friends, and I do have conservative friends, I think when they are actually active Trump supporters, then they've gone on a bridge too far. But if they're traditional Republican conservatives, They can still be, I can still be friends with them,
Mhm.
even though they're deluded, but we're all deluded a little bit, aren't we? But I take the bridge too far is that they're actively promoting Trumpism. I think,
Right.
you've gone a bit too far, and it'd be the same on if you were a leftist. If you were saying I'm a communist, I would say good luck to you. Have a look at history and see the consequences of that ideology. It's not been too good for the societies that it's been applied to. But let's get back to subject, for God's sake, Jonathan. I think I've lost track, actually. It happens when you get to my age, actually, dear. But no, I think just to finish off, what we also have this nauseating, well, I find it nauseating, amongst big tech and about companies having a diversity director of diversity and we've seen it in Basecamp with the two founders of Basecamp recently, who I respected, and David I still do, and I have his email and we have discussed things, and I respected his interview of the Great Leader, where it was one of the few interviews where the Great Leader was challenged with his gaslighting, fucked up thinking, which he spews out regularly. But then we had what happened at Basecamp, where it imploded, and their way of dealing with it is to stop any conversation inside their company and refuse to go on any podcasts and discuss the implosion in their own company, yet they were so willing to criticize other people and other companies. It's quite hilarious, really. What's your thoughts about that?
Whenever I hear stories like that, I am astounded at seeing people who claim to be rational and data driven make a choice that isn't supported by the data. We have data.
Would you encourage people to draw up lists of your clientele that had foreign names and then take the piss out of them? Would you actually think that is a great thing to promote culturally in your company, Christine?
So me personally, right, from a value standpoint, which is different than how other people are operating, right? So I always think about both. From a value standpoint, I think a lot about the kind of world that I want to live in. And we were talking about beliefs, right? And that stands to be mine is I want to live in a world that matches up with the types of experiences that I've had being a third culture kid, right? And wanting a world in which these types of like little weird communities are working together. That's what my podcast is about, right? That's what my fascination with the cult like reporters is about. I'm like, oh, what's going on?
I'm gonna rename my podcast the Cult of
so
WordPress.
But so from a belief standpoint, there's a world that I want to live in which people can have their names, in which we want companies to reflect the world at large because it is the right thing to do. But if that's not you, if you're like, I just want the best outcomes, we are a business running a business, there is endless amount of data that shows that diverse teams that reflect the population of the world make more money. They make more money. Why? Because when you have a team that reflects the population of the world, you can sell to the whole world better. Because when you have a team that doesn't reflect the population that you're selling to, then you get really good at selling to the population of your team, because that's the perspectives that they're bringing into the boardroom.
And don't get me, yeah.
You know,
And
so I always look at that and I think about that. And when I saw the base camp thing, I thought about that, right? The base camp leaders in particular are the type of people that pitch themselves as these rational and analytics driven kind of people.
well,
Great.
they just throw so much mud to other people. Yeah, when they got some themselves, they just couldn't handle it at all. It just imploded totally in their face, didn't it?
Mm-hmm. And so to me that's really interesting. And so here's what it points, right? I keep kind of going back to like the same points, which is when something is hard and uncomfortable, we want to turn away. We're like, no, I don't even want to look at that, right? Like
Personally or business wise, we
right.
we really don't want to deal with it, do we?
Yep. And the conversation right now is really uncomfortable. It's really difficult to look at the potential that you've hurt someone else without meaning to, right? And
I think you've been rather charitable. I think you've been very charitable there, actually. But
right. And so when we're faced with that discomfort, we can either lean into it and feel really bad, you know, or we can turn away.
Well, I've got to tell you, Christine, like David, I've got you see, and we have exchanged emails, but I have got a couple of friends that know him personally, and I made numerous offers for them to come on the podcast. You know, we're not the biggest podcast, but we have a big voice in WordPress and in the open source community. And crickets, silence, crickets. And to me, it's so disappointing that when it comes to push to shove, that both founders are totally gutless. You know, they really morally are gutless. But there we go. You know, actions speak much more than words sometimes, don't they? I think we're going to wrap it up. I have managed to piss off literally everybody in the tech industry. You have managed to weave your way without things, my madness touching you too much. But I think it's been a fascinating show. We've covered some very powerful subjects. We've done it in an honest and reasonably uplifting way. Things are they. You mustn't let yourself get depressed. Things will change. There's a path to history. That path is to enlightenment and opportunity. We just got to make sure individually that we are part of that movement forward, not a reactionary part dragging opportunity and growth backwards. I'll see you next week, folks, for another great interview. See you soon. Bye.